"You will sleep with me tonight," three giant Apache girls said, lone famer. John Miller had always lived a quiet life. His farmhouse stood at the edge of the desert, far from any town or village.
The land stretched endlessly in every direction, a mix of golden sand and stubborn shrubs, dotted here and there with tall, weathered rocks. John was a solitary man, not by choice but by circumstance. Most people in the nearby town had long given up farming in such harsh land, leaving only him, stubborn and determined to care for the soil, the animals, and the life he had built. Every morning before the sun rose, John would step outside to check on his livestock. The goats would bleat softly, their eyes reflecting the first faint light of dawn, and the chickens would cluck as they pecked at the dry earth for food. He had grown used to the rhythm of the land. Seasons came and went, each bringing its challenges. Droughts that left the earth cracked and thirsty, storms that tore through his fences, and long nights when the wind seemed to carry voices no one else could hear. John liked the solitude most of the time. He enjoyed the quiet that allowed him to think, to plan, and to feel at peace with himself. But sometimes in the deep hours of the night, he felt a strange emptiness. It was not loneliness in the usual sense, but a kind of longing, as if the land itself demanded companionship. He often sat outside under the stars, letting the cool desert air wash over him, imagining what life might have been like if he had family or neighbors close by. The silence around him was both comforting and heavy, and in that silence he had become deeply aware of every sound. The wind rustling the leaves of the sparse trees, the distant howl of a coyote, or the subtle shifting of sand across the dunes. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and red, John noticed something unusual. He had been walking along the edge of his property, inspecting the fences that had suffered from the afternoon wind, when his eyes caught a strange set of footprints in the sand. They were enormous, larger than any human footprints he had ever seen. The shapes were distinct, clear against the soft desert floor, and they led toward his farmhouse. John stopped in his tracks. He bent down to examine them closely, running his fingers over the ridges left by whoever, or whatever, had made them. His mind raced with thoughts. Perhaps some wandering travelers had passed by, though it was rare for anyone to come so far out. Or maybe the tracks belonged to one of the larger desert animals, though he had never seen anything with feet so large. John's heart beat faster as he considered the possibilities. The local townspeople often told stories about the land. Legends passed down for generations about spirits and guardians that roamed the desert at night. Among them were tales of three giant Apache women, protectors of the land, who appeared to those who dared live too close to the wilderness. People spoke of them in hushed tones, warning that encountering them was a sign of a test or a challenge. John chuckled nervously at the thought. Legends were just stories, he reminded himself. But as he looked at the footprints, he could not shake the feeling that there was something unusual about them. They seemed purposeful, deliberate, as though whoever had walked there had intended for him to see them. The evening breeze carried faint sounds, soft whispers, almost like the rustle of distant voices. But when he paused and listened carefully, there was only silence. The desert seemed to hold its breath, waiting for him to act. Brown decided. He decided to go back to the farmhouse. His mind was filled with curiosity and a little fear, though he refused to admit it. He moved carefully, checking behind every fence post, scanning the horizon for movement. The sun was gone now, and the first stars began to twinkle above tiny diamonds in the endless dark blue sky. He reached the porch of his home and leaned against the railing, letting out a slow breath. The footprints stopped just short of his property line, disappearing into the sand as if they had never existed.
Night fell fully, and with it came the usual chorus of desert sounds.
Owls hooted in the distance, and the wind carried the faint cries of nocturnal animals. John went inside, locking the doors and windows, though he knew the desert was too vast for anyone to reach him quickly. He lit a lamp and sat by the kitchen table, trying to calm his thoughts. Yet, even with the warm glow of the lamp and the familiar creaks of his home, he could not shake the sense that something was watching him. It was not a fear of harm, but a feeling of presence, an awareness that he was not entirely alone in the vast expanse of the desert. As the night deepened, John's thoughts drifted again to the legends. The 3 Apache women were said to be giants, towering and graceful, appearing only to those who needed to face themselves. They were guardians, teachers, and sometimes challengers. Meeting them was not a threat of violence, but a call to courage. Those who saw them were said to emerge stronger, having confronted the desert and their own limitations. John had always been practical, skeptical of such tales. Yet looking out into the dark night, he could not help but wonder if the footprints were connected to something beyond the ordinary. Bed. He tried to sleep, but the bed felt too soft, the quiet too loud. Every creak of the house, every movement of the wind seemed amplified in the stillness. He lay awake, thinking about the land he had nurtured and the loneliness he had accepted as part of his life. Deep inside, he knew that the desert was testing him in a way only it could. And though he did not fully understand what awaited him, a part of him felt ready to face whatever challenge might come, to prove to himself that he was capable of more than mere survival. Hours passed. The moon rose high, casting silvery light across the desert. Shadows stretched long and strange, making ordinary rocks and trees appear otherworldly. Breath. John's eyes adjusted, and in the distance he thought he saw movement, a flicker of motion between the dunes. He rubbed his eyes, convincing himself it was just his imagination. Yet the feeling of being observed persisted. He rose from the bed and stepped onto the porch once more, feeling the cool night air brush against his face. The desert was alive in a way that was both terrifying and beautiful. He breathed in the scents of sand and sagebrush, listening to the symphony of quiet life around him. It was then that he noticed them. At the edge of the property, 3 figures stood, tall and imposing, their outlines visible in the moonlight. John's heart pounded in his chest. He could see now that these were no ordinary people. They were immense, their presence commanding the night itself. He froze, unsure whether to run, hide, or call out. But even as fear gripped him, a strange calmness settled over him. These figures were not moving aggressively. They were watching, studying him with an intensity that made the hairs on his arms stand on end.
John realized that this was no random encounter.
The legends had come alive before him. The 3 giant Apache women, guardians of the desert, had arrived. And though he did not yet understand why, he felt that his life, the quiet, predictable life he had always known, was about to change forever. He was no longer alone, not truly. Something greater had come to test him, to challenge him, and perhaps to teach him lessons that only the desert could offer. The night stretched on, filled with anticipation. John knew that sleep would not come easily. He sat on the porch, staring at the figures, feeling a mixture of fear, awe, and curiosity. The footprints, the whispers, the legends. They were all connected now, forming a story that he was living in real time. And in that moment, John understood that whatever happened next, he would have to face it with courage, patience, and an open heart. But as the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, painting the desert in soft pinks and golds, John remained on the porch. He was a lone farmer, no longer merely surviving in the desert. He was a man standing on the threshold of something extraordinary, something that would test his limits, reshape his understanding of the world, and perhaps change the course of his life forever. John Miller's heart raced as he stared at the 3 enormous figures at the edge of his property. The moonlight reflected off their forms, making them seem almost ethereal, like spirits that had stepped out of a story from long ago. Their presence was both intimidating and strangely majestic. For a moment, John was frozen, unsure whether to move or stay still. He had lived alone in the desert for years, but he had never faced anything like this before. The figures remained silent, standing tall and still, watching him. John noticed that they were dressed in long, flowing garments that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. Their hair was dark and long, moving gently with the breeze as if it had a life of its own. Each step they took toward him seemed purposeful, measured and slow, yet John could sense immense strength in every movement. They were unlike anything he had seen in his lifetime, giant in stature, yes, but also carrying an air of authority and wisdom. John swallowed hard. Who are you? He asked, his voice trembling slightly. The words felt small in the vastness of the night, almost swallowed by the wind and the desert itself. For a moment, there was only silence in response, and John felt a shiver run down his spine. Then, one of the figures spoke. Her voice was deep and resonant, carrying across the desert like the distant roll of thunder.
"You will sleep with us tonight," she said.
Bray. John's eyes widened. The words sounded strange, even frightening at first, but he quickly realized, from the tone and the calmness in her voice, that she did not mean harm in the usual sense. It was as if she was speaking metaphorically, signaling that John was about to face a trial, one that would test his courage, patience, and understanding of the land he had called home for so long. He took a hesitant step back, but remained rooted to the spot. I don't understand, he said, trying to find his voice.
"I am just a farmer."
Why? Why are you here? The second figure stepped forward, her presence commanding yet calm. You have lived here alone, surviving in the desert, but you have not faced yourself fully. Tonight, you will learn. Tonight, you will see what lies within you. Her words were gentle, almost like a whisper carried on the wind, yet they held a weight that John could not ignore. John looked at the three women. They were immense, but there was no malice in their eyes. Instead, he saw something that startled him: understanding. Despot. It was as if they had watched him for years, studied every step, every choice, every struggle he had endured in this harsh desert. They were not here to punish him. They were here to guide him in their own mysterious way. Breaths. A sense of awe washed over John, mingled with fear. He had always been a practical man, grounded in the reality of farming, animals, and the unforgiving land. Stories of spirits and legends had seemed distant, almost like fairy tales. Yet here they were, real, or at least real enough to make his heart race and his mind question everything he had ever believed. The third figure moved closer, and John could now see her clearly. Her eyes were deep and ancient, reflecting the moonlight with an intensity that made him feel as if she could see directly into his soul. "Do not be afraid," she said softly, though her voice carried through the desert. "The night is long and the journey will be challenging, but those who face the desert and themselves emerge stronger. You are ready for this, John Miller." He swallowed hard, feeling a mix of fear and anticipation. I don't know if I am ready. I've survived the desert, yes, but this is something I have never faced before. The first woman smiled faintly, a smile that was both comforting and mysterious. "You do not need to know the outcome," she said. "Psst. You only need to walk with us, to learn, to see, and to endure. The night will teach you what you need to know." John took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. The desert around him seemed to shift, as if acknowledging the presence of the three women. The sand glimmered faintly under the moon, and the air felt charged, alive with energy. With a cautious step, he moved closer to them, following as they turned and began walking towards the heart of the desert. Their strides were long and steady, yet John matched them as best as he could, feeling every muscle in his body strain against the uneven sand. The journey was silent at first, save for the whispering wind and the crunch of sand underfoot. John's mind raced with thoughts. Pete, who were these women? How could they be real? And yet there was no time for doubt now. Only observation, endurance, and awareness. The desert stretched endlessly around them, a mix of shadow and moonlight, familiar yet strange under the guidance of the giant figures. After some time, John noticed that the women occasionally paused, pointing toward different features of the desert. A cluster of rocks shaped like a guardian spirit, a patch of desert flowers that thrived despite the harsh conditions, and a distant canyon that seemed impossibly deep. Breath. Each pause was deliberate, each gesture meaningful. It was as if the desert itself was speaking through them, teaching John to notice the details he had often overlooked in his daily life. Hours passed, and the night grew colder. The wind howled softly, brushing against John's face, carrying with it the scent of sand and sagebrush. Yet the women moved with ease, their steps unaffected by the terrain or the elements. John struggled, but he also began to understand something profound. This journey was not about physical endurance alone. It was about awareness, patience, and humility. The desert was vast, unforgiving, and beautiful, and he was learning to respect it in a way he never had before. At one point, they reached a plateau overlooking the desert. The view was breathtaking. Below him, the land stretched endlessly, bathed in silver moonlight. The women stopped and turned to John. "This is the desert as it truly is," said the second woman. "Harsh, but alive. Dangerous, yet full of lessons. You have survived this far, but survival is not enough. Birth. You must understand, adapt, and respect." John nodded, feeling a deep sense of realization. For years, he had seen the desert as a challenge to conquer, a place to survive. But now, under the guidance of these figures, he began to see it differently. It was a teacher, a living being with its own rules, patterns, and wisdom. And he, though small and human, was part of its story. The journey continued until the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, painting the desert in hues of pink and gold. But John felt exhaustion in his body, but clarity in his mind. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and awe all at once, and he had endured. The women stopped once more, looking down at him with expressions that conveyed pride, understanding, and something else he could not name, a quiet approval. "You have begun to see," said the third woman. "The night tests those who dwell in the desert. Few understand, fewer endure, and even fewer emerge changed."
You are among the rare ones, John Miller.
"Remember what you have learned here tonight. It is only the beginning." Bye. John looked at them, feeling gratitude, awe, and wonder. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere. "But I don't fully understand. But I feel I have learned something important. Something I will carry with me." The three women did not answer immediately. Instead, they slowly turned and began walking back toward the horizon, their forms fading into the morning light. John watched them go, feeling a strange mix of loss and fulfillment. Though they were leaving, their presence remained with him, etched into his memory, into his understanding of the desert, and into his sense of self. As the sun rose higher, John stood on the plateau, breathing deeply. He felt changed. Not in a way that could be measured or explained, but in a quiet, profound sense. The desert was no longer merely a place to survive. It was a teacher, a guide, and a mirror to his own spirit. And the three giant Apache women, whether real or legendary, had been the instruments of that transformation. Returning to his farmhouse, John moved with a new awareness. Every rock, every plant, every animal he passed seemed alive in a way he had never noticed before. The morning wind felt softer, the sunlight warmer, and even the distant calls of desert birds seemed to carry a message. He understood that life in the desert was not just about survival, but about understanding, respect, and the courage to face what one could not fully comprehend. By the time he stepped inside his home, the sun was fully up, casting light across the dusty floor and familiar furniture. John felt a sense of peace he had not experienced before, mixed with a quiet determination. He had faced the night, faced his fears, and glimpsed something beyond ordinary life. And though the three giant Apache women had vanished with the dawn, their lessons would remain, guiding him in ways he could not yet fully articulate. For the first time in many years, John Miller felt a deep connection, not just to the land he had worked for so long, but to the mysteries that lay beyond it. The desert was no longer empty or silent. It was alive, full of secrets, and full of opportunities for those willing to see, listen, and learn. And John was ready to face whatever came next, carrying the memory of the night, the journey, and the three remarkable figures who had forever changed the way he looked at the world around him. The morning sun cast its golden light across the desert, revealing every ridge, every dune, and every rock that John had learned to navigate over the years.
But today, the desert felt different, alive in ways he had never imagined.
The events of the previous night still echoed in his mind. The footprints, the whispers, and the towering figures of the three giant Apache women had left him changed, yet he could sense that the real challenge was only beginning. John left his farmhouse and walked towards the edge of his land, the sand warm beneath his boots. He remembered the last words of the tallest of the women. The night tests those who dwell in the desert. Few endure, and even fewer emerge changed.
He wondered what tests might still await him. As he walked, he noticed subtle signs that the desert had transformed overnight.
Small plants he had never seen before sprouted between the rocks. The wind carried scents unfamiliar to him, sweet and sharp at the same time, like the desert itself was breathing new life into the morning. Suddenly, movement caught his eye. Across a distant dune he saw them again, the three Apache women, standing tall and still, as if waiting for him.
John hesitated.
He had thought the encounter was over, that they had vanished with the dawn, yet here they were calling him to follow. He took a deep breath and began walking toward them, feeling a strange mixture of fear, curiosity, and resolve. Each step he took felt heavier and lighter at the same time, as if the desert itself was testing his determination. When he reached them, the tallest of the women spoke. "John Miller, to walk this land without understanding its spirit is to live half a life. Today you will see what lies beneath the surface. Are you ready to face the desert, truly?" John nodded, his throat dry. I am ready," he said, though doubt lingered in his mind. Could he truly face what they intended? The women led him to a narrow canyon, its walls steep and jagged. Shadows stretched across the sand, making the rocks seem taller than they really were. John realized this part of the desert was dangerous. Loose stones, hidden crevices, and sudden drops demanded full attention. The first woman said, "The desert mirrors the challenges within you. Your fears, your doubts, your weaknesses. They will all appear here. Watch carefully. Step wisely, and do not rush. Haste is the enemy of wisdom." John felt a shiver run down his spine. He had survived storms, droughts, and the harsh sun. But this was different. It was a test not of strength, but of patience, awareness, and courage. He followed closely as the women moved effortlessly across the canyon, their enormous strides carrying them over terrain that made his legs ache. Every time he thought he had found firm ground, the sand shifted beneath him, reminding him that the desert demanded respect and careful attention. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the canyon floor. John felt sweat run down his face, his body tired from the exertion. Best. Yet his mind was alert, noticing patterns he had never seen before. The way wind carved the rocks, the subtle tracks of desert animals, the way sunlight reflected off certain stones. The women paused frequently, pointing to these details, teaching him to observe, to anticipate, to understand. "The desert speaks to those who listen," the second woman said. "You must learn its language." As the day continued, the challenges grew more intense. At one point, John had to climb a rocky slope that seemed impossible. Great. Loose stones slid under his feet, and every step was a test of balance and courage. He glanced up at the three women, who watched him without offering a hand. Narration. "Strength alone will not carry you," the third woman said. "You must trust your mind, your judgment, and your heart." John took a deep breath and concentrated. He noticed small indentations in the rock that could serve as handholds. He shifted his weight carefully, testing each step before committing. Grasp. Slowly, painstakingly, he climbed higher, until finally he reached the top. When he turned, the women nodded approvingly. "You see now," the first woman said. "The desert is not an enemy to fight, but a teacher to respect. Courage is measured by persistence, not speed." The next challenge came as they descended into a valley filled with desert flowers and tall grasses. It seemed peaceful at first, but John quickly realized that it was a maze of hidden dangers. Dips, thorns, snakes, and sudden dips in the ground demanded constant vigilance. The women guided him not by touching him, but by gestures, showing him how to move carefully, how to observe subtle signs, and how to remain calm under pressure. By late afternoon, John felt a deep sense of exhaustion. His muscles ached, his skin burned from the sun, and his feet were sore from the endless shifting sand. Yet he also felt something else, a growing awareness of his own strength and determination. The desert, once a harsh and unforgiving place, now felt alive and teachable. Each obstacle he overcame revealed a new understanding of himself, his limits, and his capacity for endurance. During a brief rest by a small oasis, John reflected on the lessons he had learned. He realized that his fears were often exaggerated in his mind. What he thought were insurmountable challenges could be overcome with patience, observation, and courage.
The women, though silent for most of the day, had taught him more than any book or experience in his years of solitary living.
He had faced himself in ways he had never imagined, and he had survived, not by brute force, but by learning, listening, and respecting the land around him. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, the women led John to a cliff that overlooked the desert plains. The view was breathtaking. Rolling dunes stretched into the distance, catching the golden light of evening, and the sky was painted in deep purples, reds, and oranges. John felt a sense of wonder, awe, and humility, all at once. Breath. He had seen the desert in its harshest and most beautiful forms today, guided by beings who seemed more spirit than human. "You have endured the trials of the day," said the tallest woman. "Breath. You have learned observation, patience, and courage. But the final lesson comes with the night. Only when the desert is at its darkest will you truly see what lies within you." "Are you prepared?" John nodded again, feeling a mixture of excitement and apprehension. He had grown stronger, but he knew the night would demand more than he had given so far. The women's eyes glimmered in the fading light, reflecting the wisdom of countless generations. He felt both humbled and inspired. The descent into the valley and the climb to the cliff had taught John something vital. That life, like the desert, is filled with challenges that test more than strength. They test awareness, patience, courage, and understanding. Each step he took, each choice he made had consequences. Each lesson from the women was a reflection of his own potential. As darkness began to fall, the three women prepared him for what was to come. They did not speak much, but their gestures and presence conveyed more than words ever could. John realized that the night would bring him the ultimate test, not of physical ability, but of mind and spirit. He felt ready, though he knew the journey was far from over. The desert around him grew quiet, as if holding its breath. The shadows stretched long, blending with the fading light. John felt a mix of fear, anticipation, and courage rising within him. He knew that the lessons of the day would guide him, but he also understood that the night would demand more.
The three giant Apache women had not finished with him. Their purpose was not just to guide, but to awaken something deep within him, to show him who he truly was when confronted by challenges far greater than himself.
And so, as the final light of day disappeared behind the horizon, John Miller stood ready at the edge of the cliff, staring into the desert night. He had faced fear, doubt, exhaustion, and challenge, and had learned to endure. He was stronger, wiser, and more aware than he had ever been. Yet, he knew the ultimate lesson awaited him in the darkness, a lesson that would test everything he had learned and perhaps change him forever. Night had fully fallen over the desert, wrapping the land in a deep, quiet darkness. The air was cooler now, carrying the scent of dry sand and distant sage. John Miller stood at the edge of the cliff, his body tired from the day's challenges, but his mind alert and curious. He had survived the canyon, the rocky slopes, and the hidden dangers of the valley, and now he understood that the night held the greatest test of all. The three giant Apache women standing silently before him seemed to radiate a calm power that both awed and unsettled him. "You have done well today," the tallest woman said softly, her voice echoing across the silent desert. "But the night demands more than endurance. Bravens. It requires seeing the truth within yourself, facing what you have hidden even from yourself." John swallowed hard. He had no idea what she meant, but he trusted her words. For years he had lived alone, believing that solitude was his only companion. He had buried fears, regrets, and doubts deep inside, focusing on work and survival. Now, for the first time, he realized that the desert and these mysterious women were asking him to confront the inner shadows he had avoided for so long. The women led him down a narrow path that twisted between jagged rocks. The moonlight glimmered off their forms, guiding him through darkness that seemed almost tangible. Every step John took was careful, every movement deliberate. The desert around him felt alive, almost as if it were breathing with him. Shadows shifted strangely, and distant sounds, sometimes a howl, sometimes the rustle of sand, made him pause. But he pressed on, remembering the lessons of patience and observation from the day. After some time, they reached a vast plateau that overlooked a canyon. From this height, the desert seemed endless, stretching into the horizon in soft waves of shadow and moonlight. The women stopped and turned toward him, their faces serious and calm. "This is the moment," the second woman said. "You will see what lies within and what you must release to move forward."
Suddenly, the desert around John seemed to change.
Brahavius. Shadows thickened, forming shapes that looked familiar yet strange. At first he thought it was his imagination, but then the shapes became clearer. He saw figures resembling moments from his life, mistakes he had made, fears he had ignored, opportunities he had let slip away. The images were vivid and almost lifelike, and for the first time John felt a deep ache in his heart. He realized that the desert was showing him the truth he had been avoiding, that surviving alone was not enough, that life required courage, honesty, and connection. "You cannot hide from yourself, John," the third woman said gently. "To grow, to endure, to thrive, you must face your inner truth. Only then can you move forward as more than just a man who survives." John closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the desert and the night pressing upon him. He remembered times when he had been afraid to ask for help, moments when he had let pride or fear keep him from doing what he knew was right. The shadows seemed to echo those memories, whispering softly, reminding him that strength was not only in physical endurance, but in courage of the heart. He took a deep breath and opened his eyes. The shadows were still there, but he no longer felt paralyzed by them. Instead, he stepped forward, facing each image, acknowledging it and letting it pass without clinging. With each step, the weight in his chest lifted a little, replaced by a sense of understanding. He realized that the desert had not only tested his body, but had prepared him to confront his spirit, to see himself clearly, and to accept both his limitations and his potential. The women watched silently, their presence steady and encouraging. Ricade. John felt a connection with them. Not fear, not awe alone, but a deep sense of guidance and trust. They were teaching him that true courage was not about dominating the land or proving strength, but about understanding, humility, and the willingness to face what was difficult, even when it frightened him. Hours seemed to pass as John walked among the shifting shadows, confronting every fear and regret he had ever carried. Sometimes the shadows would twist into shapes he recognized. A lost friend, a failed attempt at a dream, moments of self-doubt, but he kept moving, guided by the presence of the women. Bathed time, he faced a shadow he felt lighter, more aware, more capable of seeing the desert, and himself clearly. Finally, the desert grew quiet again. The shadows faded with the slow movement of the moon, leaving only the silver light on the sand and rocks. John looked around and realized he was standing taller, his body tired but his spirit renewed. He had faced fear, regret, doubt, and uncertainty, and he had emerged with a deeper understanding of himself and the world around him.
"You have done what few can," the tallest woman said.
You have faced the desert, and more importantly, you have faced yourself. Remember this feeling, John. Life is a series of challenges, but each challenge is an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to become more than you were yesterday. John nodded, feeling gratitude and a quiet sense of triumph. "Thank you," he said. I understand more now than I ever have. I see the desert differently, and I see myself differently." The moonlight reflecting in their eyes. "Good," the second woman said. "But the journey is not over. Life will continue to test you, John Miller, but now you are prepared. You have learned to endure, to observe, to face fear, and to see clearly. You are ready to live fully, not merely survive." John felt a surge of energy, as if the desert itself had infused him with new strength. He looked around at the vast landscape, feeling a deep respect for the land that had challenged him so profoundly. The desert was no longer just a place to farm or survive. It was a teacher, a mirror, and a companion in his life. The women began to move toward the horizon, their immense forms slowly fading into the night. John watched them go, feeling a mixture of loss and completion. Though they were leaving, he knew their lessons would remain with him forever. He could hear the whispers of the wind, see the shifting shapes of the dunes, and feel the presence of the desert in every step he took. As dawn approached, painting the sky with soft oranges and purples. John returned to his farmhouse. Every step felt purposeful, every movement measured and aware. He noticed details he had never paid attention to before. The curve of a rock, the way the sand shifted under his feet, the subtle scent of the desert flowers that had survived the night breaths. Each small observation reminded him of the lessons of endurance, observation, courage, and humility. Sitting on the porch with the first light of day warming his face, John reflected on the night's experiences, where he had entered the darkness uncertain, fearful, and alone. But he had faced his fears, confronted his past, and emerged with a deeper understanding of himself and the desert that had been his home for so long. He realized that life was full of trials, some visible and some hidden, but each one was an opportunity to grow, learn, and transform. For the first time in years, John felt completely at peace. The three giant Apache women had not only guided him through the challenges of the desert, but had shown him the path to inner strength. He understood now that true courage was not measured by survival alone, but by the willingness to face fear, uncertainty, and the unknown with honesty and determination. John looked at the horizon, feeling gratitude for the night's lessons. The desert stretched endlessly before him, beautiful and harsh, filled with challenges and opportunities alike. And though the three women had disappeared into the morning light, their presence remained, a guiding force, a reminder of the strength within him and a symbol of the endless lessons life had to offer. He rose from the porch and walked toward his fields, feeling lighter, stronger, and more aware. The desert was no longer a place of mere survival. It was a teacher, a companion, and a mirror reflecting the truth of who he was and who he could become. Bray and John Miller, the once lone farmer, knew that he was ready to face whatever came next, carrying the wisdom of the night deep within his heart. The morning sun had fully risen over the desert, casting its golden light across the dunes, rocks, and scattered shrubs. John Miller stood on the porch of his farmhouse, breathing in the warm, fragrant air. The desert had never looked more alive. Every rock seemed to hold a story, every ripple of sand appeared purposeful, and the wind carried a sense of calm determination. The events of the past 2 nights, the footprints, the shadows, the mysterious encounters with the 3 giant Apache women, had left him changed. Breath. He was no longer the same man who had walked alone through the fields just days ago.
John felt a quiet gratitude for the lessons he had learned.
The women had guided him not only through the desert's physical challenges, but through the more difficult terrain of his own mind and heart. He had confronted fears he didn't know he carried, faced regrets he had long hidden, and discovered a strength within himself that he had never recognized. The desert had tested him, pushed him to his limits, and in doing so had helped him grow. As he tended to his animals that morning, he noticed a difference in himself. He moved with more confidence, more awareness, and more patience. He observed the subtle signs of life, the way the goats grazed, the way the chickens pecked at the ground, even the movement of a lizard across a rock. Everything felt connected, meaningful, and alive. John realized that survival was only the beginning. Understanding and connection were what gave life purpose. Around mid-morning, a gentle breeze swept across the property. John paused and felt a strange sense of presence, though he saw no one. He thought of the 3 giant Apache women and smiled. Whether they were spirits, guardians, or something beyond explanation, he knew their lessons would remain with him forever. Their guidance had been subtle yet profound, teaching him not with words alone but through experience, patience, and observation. The rest of the day was spent repairing fences, checking water supplies, and tending the crops with newfound care and attention. Tasks that once felt routine or tedious now carried a sense of significance. Every nail he hammered, every plant he watered, and every animal he fed was a small act of connection and respect for the land that had taught him so much. John realized that his life as a farmer was not just about survival. It was about harmony, balance, and understanding the rhythm of the desert. As evening approached, John felt a desire to revisit the places he had traveled with the women. He walked to the canyon, observing the cliffs, the rocks, and the hidden crevices that had challenged him. The shadows stretched long in the sunset light, yet they no longer frightened him. Instead, he felt appreciation and recognition for the beauty and difficulty of the landscape. The canyon that had once seemed daunting now appeared full of lessons, waiting for anyone willing to notice and learn. Reaching the valley filled with desert flowers, John paused to rest. The soft petals brushed against his hands as he ran his fingers over them, feeling the delicate resilience that had allowed these plants to thrive despite the harsh conditions. He realized that resilience was not only a trait of nature but also of himself. He had endured the night, the physical challenges, and the emotional trials, and he had emerged stronger. This understanding brought a sense of peace that he had never known. That night, as darkness returned to the desert, John stood on the plateau where he had faced the final test. The stars stretched endlessly above him, glittering like 1,000 tiny fires in the sky. The desert was quiet, yet alive with the soft sounds of nocturnal creatures. John closed his eyes and reflected on everything that had happened. He remembered the words of the tallest woman. The night demands more than endurance. It requires seeing the truth within yourself.
He understood now that he had faced that truth and had learned from it.
A cool wind brushed against his face, carrying the faintest whisper. John opened his eyes and smiled, sensing the presence of the three women once more, though he saw nothing. Their guidance was no longer physical. They were part of the lessons etched into his heart and mind. Their influence had become internal, shaping his thoughts, decisions, and outlook on life. He felt grateful for their presence, even if he would never see them again. The following days passed with a renewed sense of purpose. Don approached each task with care, patience, and awareness. He repaired fences thoroughly, tended his crops with attention to detail, and cared for his animals with a quiet devotion. But beyond the practical work, he also paid attention to the lessons of observation, courage, and resilience. Breath. He watched the wind shaping the dunes, noticed the patterns of animal tracks, and appreciated the small miracles of the desert ecosystem. Everything, he realized, was connected, and every action mattered. News of John's transformation spread slowly through the nearby town. Villagers who had once thought of him as merely a solitary farmer now spoke of him with respect. They noticed the change in his demeanor, the way he moved through the land with confidence and purpose, and the calm wisdom in his eyes. Some even came to seek advice or guidance, and John found himself sharing the lessons he had learned without ever mentioning the three women. He spoke of patience, observation, courage, and respect for the land, hoping others could benefit from the wisdom the desert had given him.
One morning, John returned to the plateau to watch the sunrise.
The sky was painted in brilliant oranges, pinks, and purples, and the desert stretched endlessly before him. He thought of the nights when fear and uncertainty had gripped him, and realized how far he had come. He had faced the unknown, confronted his inner doubts, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more aware. The three giant Apache women had taught him not through force or fear, but through guidance, patience, and example. Their lessons had become part of him. As he stood there, John realized that life, much like the desert, was full of challenges and opportunities. Every obstacle was a chance to grow, every difficulty a chance to learn, and every moment an opportunity to understand the world and oneself more deeply. He knew that he would face trials in the future, but he now carried the knowledge and strength to meet them with courage and clarity.
Even years later, John remembered that night and the lessons of the three giant Apache women. Though he never saw them again, their presence continued to guide him.
He worked the land with care and understanding, taught others when asked, and lived with a quiet confidence that came from having faced both the desert and himself. The experiences had left an indelible mark on his spirit, shaping the way he viewed life, the land, and his place in it. John often walked the desert trails alone, feeling a connection to the land and the unseen forces that shaped it. He understood that the desert was not just a place to survive. It was a teacher, a mirror, and a companion. And he felt gratitude for the guidance he had received, knowing that the three giant Apache women had prepared him for a life of awareness, resilience, and courage. In the evenings, he would sit on his porch and watch the sun dip below the horizon, the sky painted in brilliant hues. The memories of the night, the tests, the challenges, and the lessons were no longer frightening. They were comforting reminders of the strength he had found within himself. The desert, once a place of isolation and hardship, had become a home full of wisdom and beauty. John Miller had begun as a solitary farmer, cautious and unsure of himself, facing the harsh realities of life alone. But through the guidance of the three giant Apache women, he had confronted his fears, discovered his strengths, and learned to see the world and himself with clarity and understanding. The desert had transformed him, and he had embraced that transformation fully. As he stood on the porch one last time that evening, John smiled. He knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but he also knew that he was ready. He had faced the desert, faced the night, and faced himself, and in doing so he had discovered a strength, wisdom, and resilience that would guide him for the rest of his days. A desert stretched endlessly before him, silent and powerful. John felt a deep sense of peace and purpose. He had survived, yes, but more importantly, he had grown. The lessons of the three giant Apache women would remain with him always, a silent guide, a reminder that courage, awareness, and respect for the world could transform even the loneliest life into one of purpose and meaning. John turned back to his farmhouse, the warm glow of the sunset behind him, and stepped inside with a heart full of gratitude, knowing that he had truly been changed forever. The desert, the night, and the lessons of the three giant Apache women had given him something far greater than survival. They had given him life itself.